Welcome in, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and this is Bradley Kendall, and this is Alex Pierce, and we are bringing you After Further Review, Tiger Vision's weekly college football rundown show. Bradley, it is now week 12. We're moments away, about an hour away now, from the third edition of the college football playoff rankings. We had a huge slate of games the last 2 weeks. Let's dive right into it after further review.
The Catholics needed some divine intervention this week, and especially after this, they're going to need to probably go to church and confess that they did not show up for this game at all.
Absolutely not.
We'll get more into that later. We're going to start out. We got 9 games for you on the slate. It was a big week. We'll start out west, Stanford and Washington. What were some of the main points y'all had from this game?
I mean, it was really a game that a lot of people really weren't paying attention to. It was a Friday night game. I believe it was on the road for Washington. This game was at Stanford. If I can pull it up really quick, I saw that it was a 30-22 win for the Cardinal. But overall, pretty impressive for Stanford. I mean, we feel like, I think we've talked a little bit this season, even though the Pac-12 is out of the playoff race, Stanford's still a dark horse within the conference, and they can contend with every team in the conference week in, week out. So I don't think that this was too much of a surprise. Again, it was only an 8-point victory, but the Huskies just didn't show up. They didn't have a great offensive performance, and the Cardinals got it done.
I mean, if you ask Desmond Howard, he wouldn't call this a surprising performance at all. He did have him in the playoff rankings to begin the season. So, I mean, I agree. I think Stanford, all year we've been saying they've got potential to be a great team. They rely a lot on Bryce Love, and I think the one key to this game was that they finally got some stability at quarterback. They didn't just have to rely on Love. Now, while Love was great, he had 3 touchdowns and over 100 yards. It's worth noting that he's only had one game all year where he hasn't had over 100 yards. Yep. Pretty impressive performance. Washington had a very equal game. I mean, Jake Browning played as well as he has all year, but it really came down to, I think, the defense for Washington not showing up like it has the entire season. They've kind of been relying on the entire time.
What'd you think about this game, Pierce?
I honestly didn't watch it. I haven't read a lot about it, but I can say that Stanford has not got a lot of love since McCaffrey has left Stanford, in my personal opinion. I mean, of course, Washington was in the playoff last year. I really honestly don't know that much about Washington and Stanford. I haven't watched.
It's hard to when they're playing games kicking off at 10 o'clock at night. I mean, a lot of people aren't tuning in to college football that late in the evening on a Friday, so it can be difficult at times to kind of judge how competitive those Pac-12 teams could be with the rest of the country.
Yeah, this game went under the radar. I mean, last year it was a top 10 matchup, so everybody paid attention to it. This year, Stanford got its revenge, and no one really knew about it. So. But they did play well.
Next game that we're going to touch on, this was an absolute blowout. One of many this weekend. We had the Ohio State Buckeyes destroying the Michigan State Spartans 48-3.
Say that word again.
Destroying Michigan State.
Exactly.
This one was never close.
Not at all. I mean, this is the second week out of the last 3 weeks that Michigan State's defense has really been subpar. It's unlike a Martin Antonio team. Brian Lewerke, their quarterback, kind of finally came back down to earth after some impressive performances the last few weeks. But kudos to Ohio State's secondary. After kind of getting exposed against Iowa, they really played up to the level that they've been expected to all year, and they were able to shut down Michigan State in all ends.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan State had less than 200 total yards versus Ohio State's 524. And really what was amazing to me is Michigan State had more. I mean, they almost dominated time of possession. They had almost 35 minutes of ball time. They did have 3 turnovers, although Ohio State had 2. So that in and of itself, with Ohio State having 2 offensive turnovers and Michigan State only getting 3 points, a field goal right before half, good. I mean, overall, like when you look at the body of work for this game for Ohio State, this was a flawless performance.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing we've been talking about with Ohio State all year, is just how inconsistent they can be. We saw against Iowa. The potential they have is there.
Yeah, the potential's there.
And that's what people were saying. Hey, a 2-loss team in the driver's seat of the Big Ten East still has a chance to make a run at the playoff. If they would be able to play like this the entire year, we could see that happen. But, those 2 weeks that they suffered.
Do you feel like, Pierce, there's a chance for a 2-loss Ohio State to have a spot in the playoff?
I was actually going to get into 2-loss teams later in this conversation of games, but I 100% do not think at this point there is a way for Ohio State to make it in. A 2-loss team possibly in the SEC this year, and
with Auburn being really the only option.
Yeah, that was the one that I was going to actually bring up later in the show when we got to that game. But with Ohio State, the way they're playing, they killed Michigan State. I've looked at Ohio State, but not really Michigan State this year, so I don't really know how to really say anything about Michigan State. But I can say that after last week with Ohio State losing to Iowa, which was
and they got beat down.
Yeah,
they got beat down the game. So
Barrett
I think
played like he did his freshman and sophomore.
like you touched on, the inconsistency is the most troubling aspect of the Buckeyes. But we're going to move on quickly. We're going to jump now over to the Big 12. We've got number 15 Oklahoma State beating down, or actually not a beat down. It was a close game against number 21 Iowa State. They won that game 49-42. This one was a shootout, typical Big 12 fashion.
But not typical of Iowa State. The way they've been playing all year and the way they've been structuring their game plans has been keep the offense off the field and really just try and win it in the trenches, kind of like a Michigan State would do. But really, I mean, this game they played like Oklahoma State loves to play, is that kind of shootout offensive game that they played against Oklahoma. Credit Iowa State, their quarterback did get hurt. They had to fill in their third string quarterback.
Over 1,000 total yards by both teams combined in this game. Yeah,
that's crazy.
And Iowa State might be the best 6-4 team in the entire country right now. The way that they've been gritting out week in and week out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's safe to say a 6-4, pretty impressive 6-4 right now.
I mean, their losses have been to Iowa. That was a 3-point loss, second week of the season. They lost to Texas by 10, who has contended with teams all season long. And then their last two they've dropped at West Virginia by 4 points, and now this game, Oklahoma State by a touchdown. So you're right. They are really just a few plays away from, and I mean, I know 4 losses is a lot. That's pretty much enough to knock you out of a Big Six contention. But their losses have been so close. I think that this might be the season or the season before. Like, it might take 1 or 2 more years for them to get over the hump, but they're definitely right there.
You can see the rebuilding mode that's going on right now, and it's really working for them this year. It's just taking those steps up year in and year out.
And let's not forget about their win over Oklahoma, who we have thought, who apparently could be a number one.
And their win over
contender
TCU.
Yep,
They've beaten Oklahoma and TCU this season. So Iowa State, they've got a lot going for them.
They got a good resume.
A lot of momentum.
The bubble burster the entire year, and that's what people are going to remember is the wins they had.
Next game, we're going to go over to the SEC. Number 10, Auburn shellacked the number 1 team in the country, Georgia, 40-17.
Former number 1 now.
Former number 1. They're number 1 right now, but in about an hour they certainly won't be. Auburn looked really impressive.
Like a high school team.
Almost.
They made Georgia look like a high school team.
Really showed everyone in the country the blueprint on how to beat Georgia. Georgia was such a one-dimensional team the entire year, kind of like how Notre Dame was, and both teams kind of got exposed. They forced Jake Fromm to really throw the ball, and as we were saying before the show last week, if he has that instance where he has to throw the ball in a clutch scenario, we're going to see if he steps up, and quite frankly, he didn't step up.
Yeah. This is the one game that I really enjoyed watching, and we talked about 2 lost teams. Auburn, I really feel that's my dark horse for this year. I think that Auburn makes it into the playoffs as either a 2 or 3 spot. If they win out and beat Alabama, and they win their SEC, they are
now
100%.
would they get into the SEC championship? They're second in the SEC West.
They need to beat Alabama
right now.
There's work left to do.
Okay. And don't forget that one of their losses is against Clemson, which is out of state, and
it was a close loss at the beginning of the year.
I mean, if they get in and Clemson has to play them again, I don't think that Clemson gets it done against Auburn.
I mean, I think that was just a testament to how good of a team that Auburn was, even at the beginning of the season. They, to me, look like one of the most complete teams in the country right now, offensive, defense, and
they're peaking at the right time. I think that's what you and me touched on a little bit when we talked about the games on Saturday night, is that Auburn, and there's some other teams that are, but specifically Auburn, they seem like they kind of started out a little bit slow, but they're really climbing the ladder fast, and they're peaking right in the middle of November.
And you want to talk about a dark horse Heisman candidate, Kerryon Johnson for them has been a workhorse all year, not getting any love.
Because the Heisman's been open this year.
Exactly.
It really has not been
especially the running back position.
Yes.
And I mean, with the amount of touchdowns he scored all year and the way he's carrying Auburn on the ground right now, he might get invited to New York. We'll see.
Big blowout win though for the Tigers.
Let's talk really quickly about Georgia for their playoff chances at this point. After this loss,
it took a step back, that's for sure. But I think the key for them is that they play on the opposite side of Auburn and Alabama, so they're in guarantee.
Yeah, they're in control of the SECs. I mean, they're going to the SEC championship. They're either going to face Alabama or Auburn. I think even with the loss to Auburn, how bad it was on the road. So if they are able to bounce back with a win against Alabama or Auburn in the SEC championship game, they'd be 12-1. I think they're going to get a playoff berth. It's the SEC championship.
Yeah, so the loss will be forgivable. I think I agree on. Yep.
Next game, we're going to jump back over to the Big Ten. We've got number 8 Wisconsin taking down number 20 Iowa, 38-14. I know Landon was very happy about this victory. We talked extensively after this one. It was impressive offensively and what they were able to do against Iowa, but they had 2 pick-6s, and Hornibrook had 3 interceptions. So I'm still sitting there questioning their quarterback play.
I mean, yeah, Hornibrook has been suspect all year. 11 interceptions now on the year. And Jonathan Taylor had 2 fumbles. So for a team like Paul Chris is trying to organize, where it's great on defense, they're really trying to figure out the offensive side of the ball. And turnovers are killing them. They already can't move the ball down the field, and turnovers are just kind of holding them back. But credit to Joshua Jackson of Iowa. Big Ten Player of the Week, 3 interceptions last week, and now 2 taken back for a touchdown this week. So if there's any bright spot at all, this guy for Iowa is playing well.
Yeah.
And they have a great 3 games really to end this. They're going to play Michigan this week, I believe, at home. Then they go on the road to Minnesota to close out the season. Minnesota's 5-5 overall, so really not a big game for them. But then you're going to have a big Big Ten championship game against probably Ohio State. So if they're able to get through Michigan and Ohio State in 2 of their last 3 games of the year, I think it really gives the Badgers a huge, because we've seen they've been lower in the rankings because of their strength of schedule, and their non-conference opponents have been weaker. But I think if you're able to get through those 2 conference games at the end of the year, it might bolster them into the playoff if you see chaos ensue in the other conferences.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Ohio State is playing well now is going to help them tremendously if they get to the Big Ten championship game.
Moving on, we're going to go back to the SEC. We've got number 2 Alabama. This was a nail-biter. Bradley actually picked Mississippi State in this game. And I got to say, I was rooting for you because the Bulldogs came up just short. They lost 24-31, but they had Bama on the ropes for the first time all year.
They literally did everything right except win the game. This is one of the most complete performances they had all year. Nick Fitzgerald, like I said earlier this week, I thought could really move the ball well against Alabama. Bama's been suspect to go for quarterbacks in the past. Bama just squeaked by, and I gotta say, I know Bama's banged up, but for the invincibility they've had the entire season, I think Mississippi State has found a way to probably beat them going forward. People are going to take a lot from this game, especially when they play Alabama in the future.
What's impressive on the offensive side of the ball for Bama, Jalen Hurts had 10 completions for 242 yards. So when he was slinging the ball, and Fitzgerald for Mississippi State only had 158 yards passing. So again, like you said, Mississippi State did a lot right except win the game. There were certainly areas that Alabama showed their strength. But overall, I think this game was a lot more competitive than myself and a lot of other people were initially thinking
Especially
it would be.
after Mississippi State got blown out against Auburn a few weeks ago. And you're right, that big play aspect of it came into play at the very end. Calvin Ridley scored the game-winning touchdown for Alabama. So
he saved their season.
It came to help them out, so.
But I mean, you feel like that this is probably a teachable moment for Saban when it comes to watching this game film.
Yes.
I mean, there's got to be a lot that they can take away from this. Like you said, the recipe to beat Bama. I'm sure now that it's out in the open, people could see how it's done. He's going to use that this week in practice.
Especially if they have to face another Bulldogs team going forward.
And unfortunately, like Bradley said, injuries. Alabama, they have got a banged up linebacker position, and they just can't fill it correctly. And if they don't get that back, I don't know how their playoff hopes look.
Well, it'll be interesting to see at the end of the season when they've got Auburn. I believe that game for them is
that is at home.
So it's at
No,
home for
it is at
Auburn.
At Auburn. Yeah, so that'll be big. That's a
gonna
big
be
way to close the season, and then you potentially have the SEC championship a week later. But we're going to dive over to the ACC now. This one was another blowout. Number 7 Miami beating up on the Fighting Irish in Notre Dame, 41-8. I turned this game off midway through the third quarter.
You made it all the way there? I'm surprised.
One of the most dominant games I have seen this year.
Yeah, I would have
to
agree.
It was a complete game. It was and like I said, just complete dominance.
Miami looked like a championship caliber team.
Absolutely.
Regardless of the opponent. I mean, a lot of people said Notre Dame wasn't for real. I mean, yeah, but they were the 3rd ranked team in the country. A lot of people respected what the Fighting Irish had done all season, but the defense from Miami, I think, is the big takeaway from this. Their last 2 games, I think they forced 8 turnovers the last 2 weeks, 4 in each week. So I think as long as the Canes defense is playing like they have been the last couple of weeks, they're going to continue to win.
The turnover chain is working. I thought it was ironic that the last time Notre Dame played at Hard Rock Stadium is where Miami played the game. Was the last time that they played Alabama was in the national championship where they got blown out. So 2 back-to-back performances that Notre Dame has struggled with down in the state of Miami. But you're right. I mean, Notre Dame, like I said, with Georgia, one-dimensional team. Yeah. Miami took advantage of that.
And the biggest thing I think for this you look at the total yards. Miami only had 374 total yards of offense. Their offense performed well, but the key for Miami was with Notre Dame they were forcing those turnovers and getting the ball back, putting their offense back on the field, and then taking advantage of those turnovers. It's one thing to turn the ball over, but if you go 3 and out and punt it away, what good did that do you? When you're able to turn the ball over and take it down the field and score a touchdown 9 out of 10 times, That is the recipe for success right there.
Yeah, I mean, Miami's not an explosive offensive team. We know that from the games they've played this year. This is just one of the games where they just capitalize on turnovers.
They've had trouble stringing together long drives all year. Their offense has really been inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean, Rozier's a good quarterback, but if you can shut him down, the running attack hasn't been the best over the last few weeks. So that is the one area I could see Miami potentially falling, but right now with the turnovers they're forcing, it's hard to stop.
Do you feel like the Miami or Notre Dame's playoff chances are completely erased with this loss?
Completely done.
Yeah.
But the thing, Miami, they really do well in the middle of the field. They do great when they're driving down the field, but once they get in that red zone, it's over. Like, it's just like, oh, now it's time for a field goal.
I saw they were ranked over 100th in FBS and FBS scoring. So I mean,
100. I think
that's
it's like
definitely an area for improvement.
Yes.
And that's going to be key. If they can't get any big plays going, or they're getting stopped in the middle of the field, can't even get to that red zone, what do you do from there?
So let's see. We'll see later down the road when they play a really solid defense with Clemson in the ACC championship.
Solid front four. Clemson's got a solid front four. Their secondary is beat up. Yep. It's a little spotty at times. We're going to go back to the Big 12 now. We've got a matchup between Oklahoma and TCU. The Boomer Sooner, they won this one 38-20. It was a pretty impressive win for Oklahoma. The offense continued to roll, and Baker Mayfield continued to add stats for his Heisman campaign.
He did, and it was going to be tough for TCU already just because they had to keep up with the offensive onslaught that Oklahoma was going to bring. TCU had only allowed 27 points in their last 4 games. You knew that was going to change, and it changed in a big way. Oklahoma put up 38 on them. So.
But something that I have really watched with Oklahoma in the past weeks, they really do not come into the game hard. It's usually like in this game, TCU went up a few points, like I think 2 touchdowns in the beginning.
I think it was a 7-3 game, and then Oklahoma scored 2 touchdowns to make it 17-7. And then after that, TCU never regained the lead. But yeah, they did. It took Oklahoma until about halfway through the first quarter to get their first touchdown. So that you're right, they do start a little bit slow.
In the second half, they only allowed 6 points. So I mean, like you were saying, wait until the second half to do the most damage. That's kind of what they do, and they kind of wear teams down over the course of 4 quarters.
Clean game though by both teams. There were no turnovers, so you really can't fault TCU. Their offensive performance just wasn't enough.
I mean, we see their defense in the second half.
Yeah,
no points.
Yeah,
no points.
I think this is just another. I mean, we've talked about the Big 12 a lot this year, but I think that this kind of shows the gap between Oklahoma and the rest of the field. You know, there's been a lot because TCU coming into this game was ranked 6th, Oklahoma was 5th, so a lot of people consider these teams basically a toss-up, and I mean, more or less it was, but I think this was Oklahoma's statement of, hey, we are the Big 12 right now.
Especially when they're going to have to rematch one of these teams later on in the Big 12 championship game. They kind of already know what to do to beat both of these teams, and they've done it. We've seen it, so that'll play a key factor for them later on.
Who will they play in the Big 12?
I think TCU right now has the advantage because of the tiebreaker over Oklahoma State. So I believe unless TCU falters their last 1 or 2 games, I think TCU gets that bid to the Big 12 championship game. But I kind of want to see Oklahoma State because I want to see that 100-point shootout that they had earlier this year. So we'll see.
Well, ESPN has TCU ranked 2nd. Did you say that TCU was going to be or Oklahoma State? Because they're both.
It is the top 2 teams in the conference.
Yeah, they're Oklahoma 6-1 in the conference. TCU and Oklahoma State and West Virginia are all 5-2.
Yeah, I think TCU, they beat both Oklahoma State and West Virginia, so they have the tiebreaker. I don't know who they play. I think they play Texas Tech, I want to say,
might be
towards the
right.
end of the year.
Let's look at TCU's schedule. They play Texas Tech and then Baylor. Those should be 2 wins
pretty
there.
Favorable games for them, so you don't see them losing that.
And yes, they have beaten Oklahoma State and they have beat West Virginia, so you're right. They hold the tiebreaker there. Last game that we're going to touch on from this past weekend, the game here in Clemson, the number 4 Clemson Tigers beat Florida State 31-14. Took a little while for the Tigers to get going. We had a couple of mistakes throughout the game, but overall, solid performance. And the Noles gave Clemson a pretty good game.
Yes, they did.
They did. I mean, it was going to take a little while for Florida State to get accustomed to the environment. You look like James Blackman was a little bit banged up and a little bit overwhelmed by the environment early on. He was taking some big shots. I think the key was that Clemson, while they did struggle in the second half, they did allow Florida State to kind of creep their way back in. A lot of that had to do with injuries. Dexter Lawrence didn't play. Kendall Joseph was out. You also saw Ryan Carter get hurt in the second half. So they were a little bit slim in their secondary and their front 7. That could have played a factor a little bit, but you're right. Clemson just didn't close it out when they needed to.
Well, they were up 17-0 at the half, and a lot of people, and myself included, was like, okay, this game will probably be more of a runaway. I was surprised. I thought FSU would have been a little bit more competitive in the first half, but then they came out, and it was kind of a sluggish third quarter. I mean, FSU didn't score their first touchdown until they had 1:13 left on the clock, but then they had they had another big play when they scored the second touchdown, and then right after the second touchdown, there was the fumble.
Trick play. Oh, the fumble.
Yeah, right.
the trick
They
play.
scored on the trick play. With the guy, what was it?
And
The
then
tight end
that
rolled
little
out.
Yeah,
double
rolled
reverse
out.
on the third of the touchdown.
But then
tight end.
Clemson had the turnover directly after they got the ball back, and unless we'd have had that interception by our secondary, I think that FSU might have taken the lead and made that a fourth quarter ball game. So Clemson really was kind of sleepwalking the third quarter.
The score does not dictate what actually happened in the ball game at all. But
Absolutely not. Yeah.
They released good old Travis Etienne
Yeah.
at the end of the ball game, and look what happened: 31 to 14
carries, 97 yards, 2 touchdowns. This was a great game for Etienne, and you could see he was all smiles on that Monday presser.
Oh yes, he was.
Heck yeah, he was. And the big playability is just playing huge for that offense. They can really rely on at least one of those a game to break for 40 yards. So that was huge.
Accomplished the second team goal of the season, winning the division, and so Clemson has punched their ticket to the ACC championship, where they will. I believe, is it confirmed that they'll play Miami?
They will play
So
Miami.
they'll be playing Miami. That'll be
just basically going to be a playoff game on its own.
I would have to agree. It's
Third round of
definitely going to be
playoffs.
interesting. Well, that's pretty much going to do it for the week in review. Let's transition now into a couple of news segments that we wanted to touch on. This one coming out of, I guess it's D2 maybe, Tennessee State.
I think they're D1.
Are they D1?
But lower D1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Latrell Lee was suspended after punching the defensive end coach. There was actually a video that's posted to Bleacher Report, and honestly, it was kind of shocking.
It was very shocking.
I don't think we have it pulled up. But I mean, do y'all feel like? I mean, obviously, we talked about this before the show. There's really no place for this at any level, and the coach, I believe, threw him off the team after the game. The university expelled him today, I believe, or yesterday. But you see a lot of guys get really heated on the sidelines, whether it's high school, college, or professional level. And I mean, what I'm trying to get at with this kind of conversation is, how do you think you need to? What do you think coaches need to do to better handle their sidelines or their guys in order to prevent this kind of stuff? Because obviously, I don't even think. I mean, is Latrell Lee? Do we know what position he plays?
It was a defensive end coach, so I would imagine he's the defensive end.
Yeah,
We'll look it up then.
The player was a defensive end, and the coach was actually the weight coach. The thing about what you were saying is that coach was actually specifically designed to keep those kids back off of the field so they won't get a penalty.
So maybe he was just doing too good of a job. Maybe he was really trying to dig into this player, and he just wasn't having it.
But speaking from experience, there are times in ball games where you have to keep players off the field.
I mean, you see Clemson with the guy pulls back Brent Venables every week. Yeah.
I mean, that is a legitimate job, and to go off and just hit him, there is no excuse. He needed to be expelled. It just was a bad situation all over.
So you don't feel like there's anything the coaches could do differently to help manage this? I mean, because
it's just kind of one of those unique scenarios where you just don't foresee it coming.
Yeah, but you see a lot of guys get hot on the sidelines. You see in the NFL a couple of times where you'll have different receivers or different guys on on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball getting into it with each other.
But there's a difference between getting angry and letting your anger out. And this is one of those instances where you just need to have a better control of yourself, especially when you're on a 6-4 team that plays.
But imagine, well, that's what I'm saying. Imagine the amount of press and coverage this would be getting if this was a Power 5 team or a ranked, like if this happened in the ACC. Let's say somebody from Virginia Tech, a player slugged one of the coaches. I mean, this would be huge news.
For sure would. I mean, this is not the kind of news that Tennessee State wants to get in. They rarely get any news as it is.
Yeah.
And just not a lot of good things going around the state of Tennessee in terms of football. You've got the guy from Tennessee giving up the double birds to Alabama fans.
Yeah.
During their game, and now you got this. So.
But I think it was good because you saw Coach Rod Reed. He kicked him off the team immediately after the game, and then he was expelled from school on Monday. So the university took pretty swift action. But I still think it opens up the conversation for how to better control the athletes, because obviously there's a lot of emotion going on down on the sidelines during a football game. And the players are definitely invested in the game emotionally, and you catch them at the wrong time, they're going to make a regrettable mistake. I mean, I don't know him personally, so I don't know what his motives were. Maybe he had a personal beef with the coach. Maybe he just acted impulsively. But I still think it's an issue that you see on all levels.
Yeah, I mean, you just got to know your players. You got to know their boundaries that you can go with them. You need to know their levels of temper and stuff like that. So I guess better know your players is the lesson you can come from this, if any.
Well, quickly, speaking of Tennessee, while we're talking about the Volunteer State, Butch Jones now out. He was fired for their loss against Missouri. And
so.
the little birdie is saying that John Gruden is the top candidate right now for the job at Tennessee.
Why not? I mean, right now, how long do you really want to be in the Monday Night Football booth?
He's also apparently getting some sort of – he's been contacted by the Buccaneers. I feel like he has a better chance of going back to Tampa Bay than he would before he'd go to Tennessee.
I could see it, but then again, he already has won a Super Bowl, so he's already kind of accomplished that main goal. He might want to just go back, go to college and try and – I think he would become one of the 4 coaches ever to win a national championship and a Super Bowl at a college and a NFL team. So that would be impressive on its own. He's already reached out to a couple assistant coaches around the country to see if they potentially want to come on his staff. So I say why not?
You don't think a guy like Dan Mullen at Mississippi State, he has done a lot for that program over the last few years, and I feel like he's a legit. Dan Mullen's a guy that has taken a program with Mississippi State that was essentially irrelevant before he got there and made it a fairly respectable place to go play football. So I don't see why they wouldn't give somebody like him a chance. Or you even got like Justin Fuente from Virginia Tech. Yes, Virginia Tech is doing a lot better now than they have been, in the last few years, especially when Beamer was going like in his last couple of years. But I just don't see why they don't take a chance on one of those guys.
I think though, if you're Tennessee and you look at the future of your football program, do you want the potential of a John Harbaugh, the guy that comes from the NFL, knows the game well, can recruit? It's a big time name that guys are going to recognize and gets the fans excited. Or do you want a guy like Dan Mullen? Yes, he's a good coach. Yes, he brought Mississippi State up from the grave.
I'm looking at
from recruiting stands. I would love to go play for John Gruden.
Well, I'm looking at a CBS Sports article right now, and they've got different candidates. They've got Chip Kelly on this board. They've got Lane Kiffin. Somebody like Chip Kelly could really revitalize at least their offense, if not the entire program. So I think it's going to be interesting to pay attention to. I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on.
For a conference that prides itself on defense, you throw in that high-powered offense that Chip Kelly would run, that could take the SEC by storm for a couple years until they figure it out. So. Who knows? I think the odds are definitely, I'd say, a little under 50-50 for him to even get an offer, let alone get hired.
Yeah,
so
and it's pretty posh up there in the announcing booth. I don't see why I'd want to leave it. I think I'd probably
got enough money, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, any other thoughts, gentlemen? Because I think what we're going to do is come back in about half an hour when the rankings are released after the basketball game on ESPN. So we'll be giving you a live, almost analysis breakdown of the rankings as they come out. But until then, any other thoughts, comments?
Do we want to say which ones?
Kind of disappointed now. We've had 2 great weeks.
Do you want to do a prediction for the rankings? We can do that.
We can do predictions for the rankings.
Okay. I guess we can just do top 4. Do you want to do top 6, top 8?
I'd say just do top 4. We got a few minutes left.
We'll stick with top 4. Top 4 for me. The way that I judge teams, I don't like to overreact. I like to basically look at teams for an entire season, take their whole resume into effect. So I have got Bama number 1. They've got that ranked win now that they can say that they've had. Number 2, I'd have Oklahoma, just based on the fact that all the games that they've won.
Yep.
Big 12 is a strong conference here. They got a lot of wins in the top 15 to bolster, and their losses against an Iowa State team that, quite frankly, is pretty respectable. 3rd, I've got Clemson, and 4th, I've got Miami, solely because if I matched up the teams right now, I think I would trust Clemson a little more than Miami. Miami's just a little bit too inconsistent for me. Yes, they played well against Notre Dame, but they've struggled against inferior opponents, so I would feel more comfortable with Clemson at 3.
Who you got, Pierce, in your top 4?
Well, it's hard. I feel like Alabama and Miami are the 2 top right now. And after Alabama just barely pulling it out against Mississippi State, I really feel inclined to put Miami above them, but I know that Alabama will be above them. So I'm going to go with Alabama number 1, Miami at a definite number 2.
Okay.
And unfortunately, these next 2 are Clemson and Oklahoma, of course. And I feel like they're going to teeter-totter either way. But I think in the end, they will put Clemson at 3.
Put Clemson 3,
and put Oklahoma at 4. Because Oklahoma just has not – Oklahoma is a one-loss team as well. Okay.
Yep.
But their one-loss was just –
Iowa State?
It was Iowa State. It's a good opponent.
They were
beat
okay.
TCU also. So
I respect the reasoning that you've got your top 4 where you've got them. For me, I have Alabama at 1. They're undefeated, and yes, they had the close one against Mississippi State, but that win really bolsters their resume. It's the first good win they've had in a while, so that's why, and they're still undefeated, so that's why I've got the Crimson Tide at 1. For me, number 2, I have Oklahoma, just because their offense has been lights out the last couple of weeks, and plus they were already, I believe, at 5 when they played TCU. Miami was back at 7 when they were playing Notre Dame at 3. So I have Oklahoma at 2. I've got Miami at 3 because I think right now they're playing like the best team in the country. They're also undefeated. they are definitely the hottest team in the country. I think it's safe to say that. So I've got the Canes at 3, and then I've got Clemson at 4 because Clemson has played well the last few weeks. Their defense has been inconsistent at times, but really when you look at these 4 teams, Clemson has the worst loss. Alabama and Miami don't have a loss. Oklahoma's loss is to Iowa State. Clemson's loss is to Syracuse. Now, I know you didn't have Kelly Bryant that game, but if you look at those 4 teams, who has the worst loss?
True,
It's
but
gotta
you
be
could look
Clemson.
at Miami's game against Syracuse and say, hey, they were a completely healthy team, and they almost lost to
But then
Syracuse.
who has the better wins?
Yeah, I mean,
Oklahoma
Clemson's
compared
got
to Clemson.
a lot of good wins, but I think at the end of the day, having to zero in the loss column is really what's going to set you apart.
I'd say that Oklahoma has the better top wins, you could say, but Clemson has 7 wins against Power 5 opponents over 500.
But
So, I mean,
then
that's impressive alone.
Well,
Auburn.
yeah, and you've got a lot of you got Auburn, you got Wisconsin, and a lot of other teams that are still vying for a playoff spot. We'll see where the committee ranks them in about half an hour. So until then, I'm Jay Smith. This is Bradley Kendall, and this has been Alex Pierce, and this has been After Further Review. We'll see you in a little while.